Welcome to my channel. I am Jonah MacTavish-Slaton. And so today we're going to look at ancient DNA in comparison to reporting and genetic connections to ancient remains found in Europe. In particular, we're going to be looking at my DNA and the reporting that connects between what my genetics are linked to the past. So let us begin. This report measures what percentage of DNA from ancient remains found in Europe to my own DNA. So from thousands upon thousands of DNA, 67% of my DNA is connected to the DNA found by Scandinavians within Scandinavia itself and into the areas where they would migrate or invade. Europe overall is 99.40. Now, trace amount, 0.6% of my ancient DNA is found directly to Native American Shawnee Indian from an individual from Scottish and Irish descent that had married into a Shawnee woman. This was around the 5th generation grandparent of mine, and it would have happened in the 1800s. The other 99.4 shows that my ancient DNA connection is to northwestern Europe. At the highest amount is Scandinavian at 67.39%, including two primary regions, Denmark, which would include the Geats, the Goots, the Angles, the Jutes, Danes, and Swedes, and Iceland, which would be a combination of Norwegians and Danes. The other 33% of my DNA is primarily made up, which doesn't show in the report because this shows only the highest percentage-based population groups, but the other 33% is mainly Proto, Celtic, Irish, and Scottish, Pictish, and Gaelic population groups. Going back to the haplogroups, which is very, very important because these genetics would be transferred from ancient times as people migrated or invaded from their origins or homeland into other lands. There are four primary haplogroups. R1b is the haplogroup that comes from the steppe of Eurasia and would travel through Europe, through the plains of Eastern Europe, into Central Europe, and into Western Europe. As you can see on the map, it is colored a darker blue, labeled R1b, and most of Western Europe is R1b. This would be the areas of Germany, Belgium, France, Austria, Switzerland, Northern England, Southern England, Spain, Portugal, France, Northern Italy, and of course, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. This is the largest R1b haplogroup of Europe. Now, we are talking about the Y haplogroup, and this haplogroup is passed on from father to son. Only sons can inherit this paternal marker. It is a direct linkage to the origin of your subclad of DNA all the way back to the origin of the haplogroup itself. So, son to father, to grandfather, to great-grandfather, and all the way back. The next haplogroup, number 2, most numerous in Europe, is I1M253, noted as the Nordic haplogroup that originated in Scandinavia. Today, it is found mostly at the highest rate in Norway, Sweden, Western Finland, Denmark, and the northwestern corner of Germany. This DNA would be spread throughout Europe, primarily toward the end of the Roman Empire, by the Vandals, the Goths, the Burgundies, the Franks, along with the Anglo-Saxon Jutish migrations along with the Geats and the Goots and other peoples. And then later it would be transferred by the Vikings, the Norse during the Viking Age. Then later, the Normans, which were mixed of Norse and Frankish DNA. Now, I belong to I1 M253, this Nordic haplogroup that originated in Scandinavia. This is a paternal marker of mine through my furthest back grandfather that is traceable. They would be in this region roughly around 2500 BC during the era of the pitted ware culture through the battle axe culture into the boat battle axe culture and into the Nordic Bronze Age, roughly about 1700 BC. They would still be located in this area of Sweden all the way up until, but sometime between 500 and 800 AD, they would then leave via either southern Sweden or the Jutish Peninsula, which is now Denmark, or possibly from the southern or western coast of Norway and enter northern Britain, settling in Scotland. From there, they would marry into Scottish and Irish motherlands. Thus, the children would be of a Norse Gaelic Pictish mix, and we call these individuals North Gaels in western Scotland and in the Hebrides. Eventually, these individuals would travel into Ireland, in Ulster in particular, and later into Munster and Tipperary, where they would stay for several centuries, then arrive in America. The next two haplogroups that make up the primary haplogroups of North and West Europe are R1a, which is more of a Slavic haplogroup of today's time, mostly found in Russia, the Baltic countries such as Lithuania and Estonia, Poland, Germany. There is R1a found from the more northern steppe Eurasian people and in northern, what is now modern Russia, that made their way into Scandinavia and are part of the Norse culture. At number 4, the fourth most haplogroup found in the west of Europe is I2, originating from the Balkans, and it's still at the highest region near northern Greece, Macedonia, Croatia, and so forth. This I2 would find its way into the Iberian Peninsula, into Gaul, which is France today, and into the British Isles. The next report shows ancient remains. The dots, which are blue with white circles around them, are locations of where ancient remains are found. As you notice, there are 15 of these locations found on your screen. These 15 locations of ancient remains represent the top 15 individuals of ancient through medieval time that I am most closely related to. It is important to understand that this does not mean I am directly descended from these individuals, such as a mother, or father line. It just means simply that these are the top 15 individuals from ancient times that match my DNA. So we, these ancient remains, genetic DNA, and my genetic DNA share the closest similarities of any of the tens of thousands of remains that have been tested throughout the world, which means we share the same ancestral groups. So these individuals would share the same grandfather or grandmother as I would. So we're going to look at this map and see if there's a correlation to the report that we looked at that said I was 67% Scandinavian origin in comparison to ancient DNA that still has been passed along through generation of all my grandparents on both my mother and father's side. We're going to start and look at these individuals that were found in Europe. First, we will start where the cursor is, if you can see it on your screen, We'll start here in Sweden, an island off the coast of Sweden called Gotland, found in the Baltic Sea. This individual would be found in the 1200s, and it is the latest DNA of all these remains. These remains go from roughly 8000 BC all the way up to roughly 1400 AD. So out of the tens of thousands found in Europe, these are the 15 that I'm most closely related to and belong to their genetic families and ancestral lines. So here, roughly 1200 AD, is an individual that is a male that is found in Gotland. Now, he is of this Swedish descent. These would be the same Swedish Vikings descent. This individual also is remarkable because he is very much kin to and much older remains that has been found in Gotland. And those remains happen to be the oldest of all of the I1 M253 Nordic haplogroups found in the world. The oldest is located right there in Gotland. And this individual's closest relative of all the ancient remains, besides those that were close in proximity to age, is this. He is very much a descendant of the very first Nordic haplogroup, M253, just as all of us of I1 M253 descent are related to. So this is in no particular genetic distance order. We're going to go sort of geographically travel when we look at this map and look at my DNA versus these ancient remains. So we're not looking at who is the closest. Now, understand this. There are tens of thousands of people. These are the ones that I'm related to the closest. I'm not looking at my top 20 or my top 25 because there's numerous people in Iceland that I'm related to genetically. There is numerous amount of people in Scotland and Ireland and throughout Scandinavia. We're not looking at everyone. So this map just represents the top 15. If I put the top 50 or 100, the map would be scattered with more. But they're more further genetically related to me. These are the most relations, the highest concentrate, the closest genetic distancing. So we're going to go back. We're going to look at this top 15, and one of them is in Gotland, in Sweden. Keeping the geographics of this in order, we're going to go up to Stockholm. This is in Sigtuna, if I'm pronouncing that right. I'm sure I'm not. But this is an area in Uppsala. This individual would be found during the age of the Vikings. Then going straight far north with the cursor, my arrow pointing outside of this lake, is a much older genetic deposition. And this would be before the Vendel Age, and this is the Proto-Swede, or the Proto-Swedish Viking that I'm connected to. Then we'll travel down south in between the big Great Lakes of southern Sweden. And these remains would be found in West Gotland, or the edge of West Gotland. This is found in the area called Värnhem. Now, these remains are found in the Viking Age. And they are related to my genetic ancestral family. So there are 4 of my top 15 in Sweden. One found in the medieval time after the Viking Age. One found in the age of the Vikings. Another one would be the Vendel Age, and another one would be pre-Vendel Age. Next, we'll move over to Norway, north of Oslo. This is near Lillehammer, and it's actually a little bit north of Lillehammer, perhaps 12 kilometers. And this is a Norwegian found, and it is found pre-Viking Age. The importance of this individual is very remarkable because I had taken a trip to Norway and Sweden and Finland earlier this year. And one of the spots that I visited was along a river running north of Lillehammer in Norway. And there are carvings, these prehistoric carvings on a small cliff facing. And I made a video of that and looked at it as I was exploring this region. These remains are from near the same area. And when I said in the video that I was connected and kin to these people, this is what I was talking about. They are remains found not far from this location of these carvings of perhaps moose and elk. And this individual would come from the grouping of people that would come from this area during what we call the Nordic Bronze Age. Next, on the list of genetic connections of my ancient DNA, we will travel down to the Jutish Peninsula, what is now known as Denmark. And this would be a Danish Viking in Rebbe. And this individual is found sometime in the late 900s, early 1000s. Now, we're going to pair up and go northwest. We'll come back to Scotland and Ireland and England. So we're going to go up to the Faroe Islands. Now in Faroe, this genetic connection is through the Norse age, the Viking age. The individual found here has genetics connecting him to a Norwegian father. But his mother happens to come from this Gaelic Pictish line from Scotland. So he's a mix of Norse and Scottish Gaelic. Then we go to Iceland. Well, once again, we find another mixed, but this time the individual is Danish from this area of southern Sweden, Zealand, and the Jutish Peninsula. And as another Norseman mixed in with a mother of Gaelic accent, this one, however, comes from Ireland. Next, in the far west of Iceland is another burial. This people are from the west coast of Norway. And we go far over toward Canada and the Americas. We find on the southern tip of Greenland remains of Norwegian villages. And this individuals would actually be from Iceland. And they are of Norwegian descent, that they had came from the west coast of Norway. Now we go down into Scotland. In Scotland, in an area called Moray, just north of the town of Elgin, remains were found from early Bronze Age. And this is a Proto-Pictish, perhaps Proto-Celtic would be a better word, individual. R1b, which means he came from the steppe of Eurasia, his ancestors, and passed through Central Europe into Gaul, what is now France, and Belgium, and hit the British Isles and would travel far, far north. If you're not familiar with Scotland's landscape in this location, Moray is found in between Inverness-shire and Aberdeenshire. This area in history was called the Grampian. Obviously, the mountain range, which you may be familiar with, the Grampian Mountains, which is found on the edges of the highlands. But what is important about this find in Moray is the fact that I made another video a few weeks back about regional and local populations and genetic distancing from my genetics to these local populations around the world. And in the top 10 found in Scotland was the Grampian. Incredibly, right there in the Grampian. Located back in the early Bronze Age, you would find the remains of an individual that in my top 15 ancient ancestral individuals, I'm connected to them. I would bet that the people that live in this area, which is the Grampian, this Moray and Aberdeenshire, and probably even Inverness-shire, this region around Moray, would probably still share a high level of ancient genetic connections to this individual found there. Even into today's time, I'm sure that most people in this region, this man, would probably make their top 15, if not top 10, genetic distance. Next, we'll go down, stand there in Britain. We would go down to North England. In North England, this individual, this man, is actually of early Proto-Celtic genetics. He would have came over from Belgium or Gaul or France early into the arrival of the R1B into the British Isles. Very much the same people that would be found in what is called Scotland and Ireland today. They are the ancestors of the Brythonic Celtic people, and they would be also the ancestors of the later R1B people that would come in, such as the Gaels and the Picts and so forth. Next, very edge of the screen, the dot's almost off, but this dot represents an individual that was part of the St. Brice's Day massacre. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the St. Brice's Day massacre, this is a day when they were a celebration of St. Brice. And on this day, in England, the king issued a proclamation that all Danes found in England were to be murdered and to ethnically cleanse England of all Danes, all Norsemen. And so this massacre would happen on St. Brice's Day. And one of these individuals that was massacred, murdered by the English, would be this Danish Norseman. And he is an ancestor, or part of an ancestral group of mine. Now we'll go over to Ireland, and an island off the north coast of Ireland. It's called Rathlin Island. And there's been several individuals found there, and burials from the Copper Age, or early Bronze Age. And one of those individuals I am kin to. This individual is part of this early Metal Age R1B Proto-Celtic peoples that would come into the British Isles and spread throughout into Scotland and Ireland. My next genetic group kinship would be found in Dublin, Ireland, along Ship Street, actually. And this is not any one of Celtic descent per se, because this is an individual found that had died during the time period where the Vikings, the Norse and Danish Vikings, controlled Dublin. And it was called the Kingdom of Dublin. It was a Norse kingdom. And this individual would be a Hiberno Viking or Hiberno Norse. It was a mix of Scandinavian Norse. His father was of Norse descent, and his mother was a native Irish. So this combination made him this Hiberno Viking. And this would make out my top 15 genetic connections to ancestral groups out of the tens of thousands that are available online for you to run your DNA against and see which ones are the closest and which ancestral genetic groups you belong to. These are my top 15. Now, going back, let's quickly go back to this report that said I was 67.39% Scandinavian. Is this accurate? Is my ancient roots really from this area? Well, if you look at the ancient DNA remains that I closely match up with, this is right on the money. And as you can see, there's 4 from Sweden, 1 from Denmark, but there's 1 in Iceland and 1 in England from also Denmark. There's 1 in Norway, but there's also 1 in the Faroe Islands, 1 in Iceland, 1 in Greenland, and 1 in Ireland from the Kingdom of Dublin. So that's 5 ancient remains connected to the Norse from Norway. That is 4 connected to Sweden from Scandinavia. And there's 3 connected to the Danes. Now, if you do the math, now these are 2 different reports. There's one report that looks at the overall DNA, and you understand that these are my top 15, but they don't completely dominate my DNA. But how closely related? Well, if you do the math, 12 of my top 15 are of Norse descent. That's 80%. So that report is pretty accurate, but then you have to figure out that three of these individuals are actually half Norse and half Proto-Celtic or Irish or Scottish Pictish, okay? So 3 of these individuals, remember, over here in Iceland, was half Irish and half Scandinavian. In Faroe, half Scottish and half Scandinavian. And over in Ireland was half Irish and half Scandinavian. So that equals out to be about 1.5 of these 15 individuals. If you're still following me, let's understand what that amount truly means. So what I'm going to do is give you the percentages of that. So guess what? When you do those percentages, it's roughly about 70% of my top 15 are from Scandinavia, and roughly 30% of my ancient remains of the top 15 are actually this Celtic R1b people located in Scotland and Ireland. This is incredible because these are 2 different reportings. One is reporting my ancient DNA as a whole with thousands of people pre-medieval times versus my DNA that's located in me. And then the other one is looking at my top 15, and they mirror each other nearly perfect. So this is remarkable, which means my ancient DNA is not who I am today and who I'm related to in modern populations. This is the ancient DNA that's found from 8000 BC all the way up to the Middle Ages, sometime in the 1200 to 1400 AD range. I mean, 67% is related to Scandinavian people that their origins are from Scandinavia, and 33% near from this Gaelic, Pictish, Celtic peoples of Scotland and Ireland. Very, very remarkable that this mirrors each other. Now, in modern genetics, and I did other videos, shows that I'm more related to my recent ancestry, to people from Ireland and Scotland. Now, this makes sense because the father line that left this area of southern Scandinavia and would come into the north of Britain, into Scotland, would marry into Scottish, Pictish, Gaelic lines. And they would be, they would leave this area in southern Scandinavia roughly around 8 to 900 AD and would find their way into this area in Scotland. Now, it's hypothetically that these people could have left Jutland or southern Sweden and migrated up and settled for a century or 2 in Norway, and then came with the Norwegians over to Scotland. But we really don't know. But what we do know is that they arrived around 800 to 900 AD, and they would be there in Scotland all the way up until the 1300s. So they're there for roughly about 400 to 500 years in Scotland. And there, for 400 or 500 years, they would marry into the local natives. They probably would be marrying amongst themselves and then start marrying into other Norse Gaelic peoples, but they would eventually become Norse Gaelic. And that means they're of Norse descent and they're of Pictish Gaelic descent. And these would be the great clans of the Hebrides in western Scotland. These were the people that would form out the great mercenaries in the Gaelic class. Then, in some time, presumably around the 1300s, maybe the late 1200s, up through the early 1300s, maybe the mid 1300s, somewhere around this range, they would end up in Ireland and in Ulster. By now, 400 years of mainly Gaelic and Pictish DNA coming into their lineage has now produced them into that. So now they go into Ireland, and then now they are going to be there in Ulster, and then later go from Ulster down into Munster in a Tipperary, where they would pick up more of this Pictish Gaelic DNA and would incorporation to that. So it's pretty amazing. And from there end up in the Americas. And so that is extraordinary because you can look at DNA from two different regions of spectrums. One, you can look at the ancient DNA connections to your modern connections. And modern would show a kind of a reverse of this, while ancient shows more of a Nordic connection versus roughly a 60, 70% to a 30 to 40% Celtic connection. But modern, it's the other way around, where you see more of like an 80 to 90% modern day connections to the Picts and Gaels versus the Scandinavian. And in the Scandinavian and Germanic lines in modern populations and my relations are quite lower than what is measured in the ancient times. So this is a very a cool way to look at the historical context of your people. You can map out where your ancestors came from, their migration routes, why they left and where they settled, and what their language and culture and religion and all this that makes up from their genetic deposition. Now you can use reports to look at your top ancient ancestry and compare that to your lineage, and then you can match it up with your modern day, and you can come out with some very fascinating lines. So it's very, very important because it kind of connects into both the historical context and migrational context, and then it connects into your own genetics. But anyways, I hope you found this interesting, and I'd like to do more of this in the future, and really dig into more of this ancient DNA that makes up myself and all of us. But as always, thank you for watching my channel. I am Jonah MacTavish-Slaton, and until next time.
Han